Welcome to the Syneos Health Podcast, Early Signals, where we explore the ideas, innovations, and emerging trends shaping the future of oncology. I'm Dr. Wael Harb, Head of R&D and Scientific Strategy in Oncology at Syneos Health. Recorded live from ASCO 2026, these conversations bring together perspective from leaders across biopharma, academia, and technology on the signals they're watching most closely, from AI-enabled drug development and real-world evidence to precision medicine. These conversations offer a snapshot of where oncology innovation is headed next. Let's tune into one of our conversations now. My guest is Ram Yalaminshili, founder and CEO of Tilda Research. Ram's path through this field is genuinely distinctive. He began as an engineer architecting ASCO and VMware, and then moved into precision oncology, building liquid biopsy technology at Lexent, a company later acquired by Roche. Today at Tilda, he's building something he calls agentic AI teammates, systems designed not to replace clinical research staff, but to lift the invisible operational load that slows trials down. Ram, welcome to Early Signals.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Harp.
Let's start by talking about digitizing clinical trial. This effort has been going on for years. From your perspective, give us an idea on what's happening in the field. Even today, the operational aspect of clinical trial is very complex and is very heavy.
I think what you're saying is digitization is probably not the bottleneck where we are. I do think most clinical trials are digitized already. If you look at the systems we've brought into the space here, whether it be electronic capture for data through EDCs or ECOAs and so on and so forth, or whether it's capturing documentation in various systems, the regulatory bodies all accept digital forms now. So I do think classifying the trial space as not so digitized is probably not the right construct I would describe it as. What I think is a lot of the processes have certain bottlenecks, and most of those bottlenecks are the reason why I would say that digitization is not going where it needs to go. Primarily, I would say we still have enormous amounts of coordination effort, which is manual and human heavy. And like any sufficiently complex system of workflows, when you have quite a bit of complexity around coordination, it's just a tough problem. In other words, I think a lot of the digitization efforts we've made, I think have yielded the results they could. I just don't see that getting to the next frontier where we need to get to. For that to happen, we do need to think about more from not only digitization, but also some amount of automation or autonomy in general. That's where we as Tilda, and I think the rest of the world as well, but the whole wave of AI now is looking at.
So Ram, if I understand you correctly, we have made a lot of progress in digitization, but this is not the bottleneck. The bottleneck is in how operationally we're structured. And this is what creating some of the bottlenecks that slow down research. How is Tilda Research trying to resolve this issue?
Before I jump into that, I think some perspective on where I'm coming from probably helps in defining this. As you said earlier in my intro, I did come from a deep engineering background, have been in the machine learning space for quite some time before the current wave of excitement we've had around AI and such. My perspective has been using these type of technologies to drive efficiencies in different parts of medicine. And prior to Tilda, I worked at a company called Lexent, which is a company I co-founded with a great scientific team. And a large part of our value there was using machine learning and what I would call the early versions of artificial intelligence, AI, to find signal in liquid biopsies. So to find signal in this large data set of genomic data, like sequencing data, which comes out of patient blood draws, and trying to see if there's signs of cancer in there. So there's a very interesting aspect of using these types of technologies in science and in discovery and in data analysis and things like that. I did find that very quickly while building Lexent that maybe the third of the journey for us has been scientific and the rigor around defining the product itself and trying to find the signal in this large data set. But after that, you get into the trials because you have to obviously prove it out in a scientific method. That's where the real challenges and a large chunk of what we've done was. I have a deep appreciation for where the community comes in terms of both scientific rigor in discovery and then, of course, operationalizing it through firms like yourself, like through Syneos and whatnot. And I have largely come to think of this problem as not only is it a digitization of the records, so like all these systems like EDCs and TMFs and ECOA, various other systems are there. I think it's largely about how do you create a system of intelligence? The system of intelligence, in my mind, is something which is able to coordinate, automate some parts of these complex workflows so that on an overall basis, you're actually benefiting in addition to having the digitization platforms. So it's a layer on top of the existing platforms. So that's how we thought about it. And the best way we could see us interacting or adding value into that ecosystem is creating what we call an AI teammate. And the concept of an AI teammate is it's essentially an augmentation to your team. A good example would be someone's doing site coordination. They're managing site-related workflows. Could be startup, could be maintenance, could be closeout. That's kind of like your starting point, because from there on, there's quite a bit of other workflows which come in, and these workflows tend to be quite complex. There's a lot of triage which can happen, and there's a lot of diversity in terms of what type of workflows come in. So we started to build products which essentially are able to address a lot of this complexity, the diversity of different workflows, and ultimately be able to give a type of a bandwidth and quality to the person who's actually doing this workflow. So in other words, it's a teammate. I don't particularly see it as, for example, we're not trying to build a co-pilot. We're not answering questions or trying to create some documents, things like that. I think there are great use cases for that. But the bottleneck in my mind really is about managing large number of workflows and the complexity associated with those large number of workflows. And given where we are going as an industry, how complex things are getting in terms of trial design or even the number of trials which are coming on, I think there's a absolute need for a better technology which can come in and help us as professionals manage these trials and these workflows in a much more efficient way. So that's where we are with Tilda, building those solutions.
You brought your background in engineering and you had a lot of experience finding signals in blood for sequencing data, and then now you're trying to apply that in clinical trials, how we can be able to better design workflow and using AI in that. So let me take deeper look into that. Now our clinical trial and the whole industry is highly regulated. We have developed complex sets of standard operating procedures. Are you taking what workflow has happened right now and you're trying to get support to it? Are you trying to redesign it? How do you approach these current workflows?
That's an excellent question, actually. When we partner and when we work with our customers, I frequently say this is not a technology-specific problem. I don't think the solutions which we're looking for comes from a better AI technology or any particular point solution you can build. There is absolutely an element of upskilling and AI fluency, which the teams have to actually adopt. Every organization today, it has to be in the top 3 strategic priorities: upskilling into the world of AI and being fluent in terms of how you can use AI to do what you are doing in a much better way. I think from our perspective, getting our partners on a journey where we're able to bring technology and the AI fluency, bringing them into the upskilling part of how we can support them, has become like a really big part of our offering, essentially. In that regard, we've built a substantial presence in creating masterclasses, into training programs, seminars. So not just the AI part of it, but also bringing that training and integration into the teams who we work with. And it goes back to why do we need to do that? Because ultimately change is really difficult. And as you asked me, are we changing workflows? Are we trying to recreate or redo these workflows into different forms? I think that's a very tough starting point to have if you're trying to really make an impact. One of the interesting aspects of our industry, of the trial industry, is no trial is the same. There's unique aspects and complexities associated with every single trial. I would go so far as saying no patient is the same. There is that aspect as well, and no site is the same, no vendor is the same. So you've got to deal with situations where there's a lot of diversity in general with all workflows. And that's where the complexity comes in. I would argue that's one of the reasons why we were not able to solve it in this industry up until now. And that's where some of the breakthroughs we've had on the AI front are helping us address those problems, where we're saying you don't necessarily need to change the workflow. You can keep the workflow as is, but the AI can help you irrespective of what the workflow is. There's obviously areas to improve and optimize things, but by and large, I think our philosophy has been meet the workflow where it is and try to create the right environment for the AIs to understand, to learn, to be able to infer what are the goals and be able to do that job.
So there's no two patients alike. There's no two studies alike, which create a lot of complexity, which leads to bottleneck when we're trying to apply rigid SOPs and workflows. So give me a specific example where Tilda research and AI teammates were implemented and made an impact, lift that operational and make it more efficient.
There's been some phenomenal data which is being read out right now in a handful of our publicly disclosed customer base. And we've actually put out some podcasts about this recently with the CEO of a company called Opus Genetics. Opus is a public mid-cap biotech, and they're entirely focused on rare disease. They're in the inherited retinal disease space. And it's a very unique and interesting model because I think it portends where the next generation of tech bio, as I think I've been hearing the term traditional bio versus tech bio, where that's going. I'll give you some examples on what's happened there. Opus, in our early iteration of working with them, they had a single program, which they were just trying to get off the ground, clinical program. And there was a certain amount of complexity, cost, quality, and timeliness around what they wanted out of it. And they did look at the traditional approaches in terms of making this happen. So that could be the traditional CRO industry, the traditional CNOPS industry, and things like that. Granted that it was early, this was about a year ago, they saw the potential in bringing some of these AI teammates into their workflow. What they have done since then is proven that they're able to manage 5 clinical programs with a team of 30 people. And this is the entire company. It's also pretty amazing that the company itself has seen tremendous success on their growth. I think they're the number 4 performing stock on the NASDAQ biotech now. They've been able to raise about $250 million just in the last few months. So there is a model. I think investors are starting to understand that efficient ClinOps leads to very high risk reward. And I think the ROI story starts to then shift into what can these AIs do and why is that happening? So one very high level macro is that you can do many programs with a team which is highly efficient because they're managing a lot of the traditional workflows through the help of these AI teammates. If I were to get into more detail there, then there's workflows around how do you manage your sites? What is the operational lift which you can reduce by using these AI teammates for managing site startups? In the case of Opus, there's complexities around site startups because it's a rare disease, it's a gene therapy. There's complexities around logistics, regulatory. It's a very interesting, complex situation where they had to do all of this, and our AIs were able to help them manage that in a much more efficient way. The rest of it as well, data monitoring, data management, managing complexities around protocol amendments, protocol deviations, safety. So quite a lot of these areas will start to find you can be more efficient with these AIs.
Let's talk about site startup. Let's say I'm a traditional biotech company and I'm trying to implement AI technology and make my startup more efficient. The biggest issue with site startup is selecting the right strategy for country, for sites, PIs, finding the right patient population, the time that will take. Walk me through how you would approach this issue.
If you look at the current market of site selection and the strategies, picking the sites, essentially identifying sites is a challenge. And once you do that, you go through the actual operationalizing of the site itself to get your FPI, the first patient in. Many times the FPI doesn't happen even after all this work. You're aware of the statistics where a large number of sites don't recruit even a single patient, even though you've spent enormous amount of effort and resources to basically start up these sites. So we've done site ID, we've operationalized those sites, and yet there's no result there. I don't think there's a silver bullet where AI can be dropped in and say, I'm going to be able to solve all of those problems. But from our perspective, one of the things which AIs are particularly great at right now is removing the operational complexity of actually starting up sites, actually identifying sites and being able to do this in a fashion where you can take a much broader vision towards the problem itself. So I'll give you an example. We have customers where they're doing large number of site starts, 100, 120, 150 sites across many geographies. Every geography has certain nuances in terms of what that means, what a site startup means. There may be a local IRB in certain regions. There may be a central IRB. In certain cases, there may be an EC, which is very specific to that geography. So depending on the complexities of that, you start to get into very specific workflows, which are not the same. You can't be SOP driven across the world. You have to get into the regional. And then there's complexities around how do you onboard staff, the trainings, the collection of all the credentialing, How do you check credentialing to make sure that they are in fact credentialed? Have they gotten the right certifications and timeliness around those certifications? So you start digging into this problem and you'll start to realize this is an enormously challenging task, which does require quite a bit of effort to kind of get to the end goal. And now what I'm saying is, well, that is true, but you could also have AI teammates, for example, our site startup teammates, who can come in and who can basically more or less understand the nature of what needs to be done. How do we do site startups in Australia versus in Germany or within the US? Even within the US, there are nuances between several states here. This sort of complexity is something which frequently is hard to manage. This is where I'm talking about the diversity is what's actually reducing the productivity on the industry. But an AI has no problem dealing with diversity of this sort. You can train it, it understands these types of workflows, and it's able to manage this in a very, very scaled out approach. So the net effort is two things. One is we give the flexibility to our customers where they can say, I have a target of 150 sites. And frequently that number of sites comes back to maybe the number of patients that site can recruit per month. And there's a statistic involved in terms of what that tends to be. And you walk backwards and saying, okay, for me to meet my enrollment goal, I need these many sites. And I think of this from a different perspective. I think of it as if you're efficient, if you can be productive on number of sites you can manage and start, you probably can now choose to start even more sites than you would otherwise. And hence your recruitment might be something you can take a different view on. Maybe your recruitment pace can be better. So these are the type of risks I think you're today constrained on because the cost is really high for making these kind of decisions. But what we're starting to notice in the industry through our partnerships and working with many of the leading ClinOps teams out there, these type of new models are starting to emerge really rapidly, where you have different risk-reward perspectives, which today's clinical development teams can start to take. So startup would be one of the good examples there. The other second point I wanted to make is not only on the number of sites you want to start, but also the pace and the ramp-up curve which you want to go with. So you can say, I'm going to start 10 sites a month, or you can say, I want all 100 to go right away. So this is a choice and flexibility which can be really easily managed when AIs are doing this workflow and managing a complexity around that versus, say, organizing a team of people who are then sequencing or serializing this process.
So are these AI agents that are trained on these tasks working along with the traditional team?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So the startup-related workflows, our AIs are able to communicate with the external world. They're able to understand what your ideal sites look like, what are the nuances of each particular site, how do you communicate with the site? They can email the sites, they can have a natural conversation with them. Now, of course, all of this has to come in the purview of a regulated industry and a regulated workflow. So AI governance is really important, and so is AI fluency. So I go back to the earlier point I was trying to make. When Tilda gets involved in conversation with any of the clinical operations teams we work with, it's not just an AI and that. The key here is that the AI governance and the human in the loop aspect of it is just as important. And that means you have to bring that type of a knowledge and training and fluency to the team who's managing these AIs. The way I look at the world is everyone's going to be doing a lot more with these AIs. And it's a matter of upskilling and gaining that fluency and being a great partner in terms of being able to give you that from not only the technology, but also the rest of it.
So I'm glad humans are still in the loop.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The question is that, are we reducing how many people are needed to be in these processes?
See, I think element of productivity and efficiency gain is going to happen. We are at that stage of the world where I think this is going to be seen across the board, not just clinical industry, not just clinical trials. I think if you look at any industry, I think this is a path which we have been taking on for the last 20, 30 years. Maybe I would argue even from the Industrial Revolution. So where do I see going next? I do think some of the areas which we support, we are seeing productivity gains. However, there's a number of people coming down because I think where we have ended up in the last 5-10 years of clinical trials becoming operationally more and more complex is we're trading off the amount of things which we should be doing for the number of things we are actually forced to do. There are areas where we absolutely should be spending time. And I think we've been unable to really focus on such problems to the extent we should be because we have things which we have to do. And today, if you say, okay, I have an AI teammate which is able to manage some amount of this complexity on my behalf, I'm still in the loop. But I'm using my time in such a productive way where there's a much higher quality product I can offer to my customer or to a pharma or a biotech. And so that's the change I'm seeing in the industry. I think the future of clinical trials are going to be enormously high quality. I think we're going to see a much different style of operational rigor and quality into the next months to years to come. And I don't think we're going to see any actual reduction of the industry itself. I'd be shocked because we're not seeing that at all in our customer base.
Since you've been implementing these AI teammates and the systems you're deploying with partnership with biotech and pharma, have you seen any impact on metrics, KPI, early signals to show that this technology is actually moving the needle, either reducing costs or improving the predictability of finding the right site, improving enrollment rate? From a clinical trial perspective, we're all looking at, can we get to that milestone faster? Can we get this patient enrolled? Can we collect the data? Can you share with me any of data where your work has impact on these studies?
Rather than me talk about our own success, largely I credit our customers coming out and talking about the success they've had with these AI implementations. It's very fortunate to have some very outspoken customers of ours who are talking about this and presenting it. And we've done, I think, a pretty decent job of putting their message out there, either on LinkedIn or our website and things like that. So I think I'm just going to paraphrase some of their metrics without giving out too much on the whole basis. But overall, what we're seeing is, depending on the style of your operations, if your ClinOps teams are managing a certain program, generally what we're starting to see is those teams are able to do a lot more with a lot less in terms of resources. So by that, what I mean is the number of resources hasn't come down. They're just taking more bets right now. Instead of their roadmap being 2-arm trial, now you have more arms in the mix. You may, instead of pursuing a certain style of development roadmap, now you have options to do more. So I think that's already happening, and that's where I was alluding to the Opus example, where a 30-people team initially was 2 programs, now they're looking at 5, and they might expand even further because they have a war chest of capital right now to pursue more, and their investors like it, they're believing in this model. So more is happening there in the market for more.
So what you're seeing, not necessarily letting people go, but you're upscaling, you're using your expertise in things that matters and arming them with the AI tools to become more productive so they can do more efficient and focus on things that really require expertise.
Absolutely. So again, going back to the 2 examples I just gave you, the teams have been expanding. They're constantly hiring and adding to their team. They're just choosing to do even more than what they started with. They have more programs and assets they're pursuing, which is really exciting, right? I think that's probably where this whole thing will go. That's my belief. And I frequently come back and see if we're doing something like 20,000 trials. I just can't imagine, why is it only 20,000? We have 7-8 billion people on the planet, and we have all these opportunities to do so much in medicine. And yet, to me, that number seems awfully low. It kind of goes back to the structural bottlenecks. We only have so many people who can do this work today, and we cannot expand that team, those resources by 10x, 100x. So I think the way to pursue that is these signs where we're seeing absolutely very clearly that a team can come in, use these AI teammates, and essentially pursue a lot more shots on the goal, which is a net positive for everything. One other thing I would also point out is we're talking about productivity gains, but I think quality is another big aspect. Generally, what we have seen is 2 things. One is your timeliness improves rapidly because AIs are quite timely. They can program them to be on point all the time, and they're working 24/7. So obviously you gain some productivity gains and timeliness around that. But also on the quality side, I think you'll also start to see, because one of the uniqueness about AIs are they are in some ways able to learn, they can reason, they can task plan. So they have some of these cognitive capabilities which normally are not part of traditional technology. AIs also are at a place today where quality tends to be quite high and it continues to improve over time. So we're starting to see a pretty clear separation in terms of number of queries managed on the data side, or number of findings on your documentation, number of completeness issues around your TMF. Across the board, when we look at these type of metrics, we're starting to see very high benchmarks there.
When you talked about how the whole process of access to clinical trials, and there's a lot of patients, a lot of people who could be candidates, and the bottleneck of access, because we cannot really get any drug to cure any cancer or treat any disease without these trials. But the problem is much more complex, and the complexity is not only in the clinical operation of the trial. There's patient access, the resource limitations at sites, number of PIs who are interested in doing trials. Are you looking outside of that sphere of conducting trial within the clinical operation of biotech or CRO, or also you're looking to some solutions for the whole spectrum or the whole continuum? So that would help, end of the day, bringing that patient to the trial.
As an industry, I absolutely think we will have to. I think it's such an imperative. It's almost like a moral imperative, I would say, because as somebody who's been through the clinical trial process myself, patients need it more than anything. when you don't have options, you need something, and trials are an excellent place where you might be able to get that. Is the strategy to build broader technologies not only for CROs and sponsor ClinOps teams? The answer is yes. But at the same time, I think this is a very big ecosystem. We would love to see more entrepreneurs in the space. I personally would love to see much higher quality of entrepreneurship, more talent, more capital coming into the space to power this. Even when I look at just how much investment is being presented into the space to build these kind of novel solutions, I'm almost always shocked because Tilda is probably one of the most well-funded companies in the space at this point from a venture-backed companies. But I truly think we're under-indexed. If you look at what's happening in the rest of the AI space, the dollars coming in there versus here is a rounding error, right? So to answer your question, we can do everything. I can claim that. But at the same time, I also want to be realistic about this. I think we need more people to do more. I think this is an ecosystem where there's a lot of opportunity, especially now. And yeah, I hope all the other solutions you're mentioning do become realities. I think we need help on the site side. We need help on patients, advocacy, obviously ClinOps, regulation. There's so many areas in the space which absolutely can be a much better future, brighter future.
Better future for all. I'm intrigued by something you mentioned earlier about the designation of tech biotech versus traditional. Most companies nowadays claim they're using AI and tech in their companies. How do you define that? And which companies you think is going to continue to grow and some others, because they have not embraced technology, will get behind?
I think this is a very interesting question because, I didn't coin the term traditional bio or tech bio, right? I've seen of these mentioned recently in various articles and things like that. And I don't know how they're defining it, but I have a perspective on what I would say is a forward-thinking organization. I think ultimately the question of how much of your workflow is managed through the lens of an actual AI is important to see. And what is the end result of it? Using AI for the sake of using AI is not what we're talking about. I think what is the net effect of it? Going back to the question of quality, timeliness, cost, and bandwidth. If I just look at it from those four perspectives, I think every organization could probably say, okay, last year we were here and today we are here, and have we moved the needle? It's a simple question to ask. And I would say most people have not figured it out. It's a tough problem because, like I said, it's not a technology only problem. You have to bring in AI fluency into your team. Every C-suite discussion I have, I'm very insistent on saying, this is not a tech only solution. You cannot go down that route. You owe it to your own staff and your own team to invest in AI fluency, because that is what's required to get to those metrics which will move those four areas. The way I would define it, what people are calling a tech bio or a tech CRO example is, shows the proof. Just saying we've used AI does not actually lead to these four metrics changing automatically. And I have recently started to see where I think the industry is moving very quickly from a commercial perspective from sponsors. As you know, we work with quite a few of the large and emerging CROs out there. And, it's becoming a commonplace discussion from sponsors saying, where is my AER? What's my AI efficiency rebate for pricing? And I think that's an excellent point. If you are a tech-enabled organization, you should have a very clear story around your AER. If you're bringing in efficiency and if you're moving the needle on quality, cost, time, and bandwidth, you absolutely should have much higher margins, and you should be able to pass on some of that to your partners, and everybody benefits. The whole ecosystem benefits. And in the process, you're actually expanding your net as well. Your revenues will grow because you're able to do more. And like Opus, I know it's a single example, but I truly believe those are the models that you'll start to hear more and more, even from our own customer base, where small companies like them start, and then in a year or two, they're like the top 5 companies in the world, and they're raising tons of capital to pursue more. It's a long-winded answer, but I do think the ultimate question is, what is the efficiency which can be passed on? And if you have a tech-enabled story and you're actually able to make it work, I think you'll have a very clear answer there.
Ram, looking into the future, where do you see the field is going specifically to the area that you're developing AI for in clinical development in the next, maybe, let's say, a year or two?
Fortunately, where I sit right now, the next 6 months is quite clear to me. We are today at that inflection point where we're working with some of the largest ClinOps teams. They're adopting our solutions. A lot of it is rolling out as we speak. So some of the normalization will just happen in the next 6 months, where more and more people find out that this is how you do it. This is how it can be done. And there's a bit of that learning and lag in terms of how all this has happened. But our journey started about 4 years ago, just so you know, like Tilda, we've been building ever since the LLMs first launched. It's taken us a lot of effort to get to where we are to provide these kind of products. But the net result is, I think some of our use cases will start to resonate in a much broader sense. One example or one area where I'm quite confident about what's going to happen is most of these site-related workflows are going to be highly digitized, highly automated. I'd be very shocked if in a year's time you hear CRAs saying, I spent all my day essentially communicating with 30 different sites and trying to manage this whole set of issues. I think the norm would probably be I've had to manage 3 or 4 of them because my AI has called me out and pulled me into this particular conversations. The rest of it are pretty mundane, like we're able to manage that. And I think you're going to start to see that pretty rapidly because we have some amount of inflection there in terms of the scale and the organizations that are coming on. And then there are knock-on effects from there. This is just a leading indicator of sorts. The leading indicator to me is the starting point of whatever the workflow is. Site-related workflows are a good starting point. That's your first interaction. And then there's knock-on effects of workflows from there on. So how you manage your documentation, how you manage your quality around your data, how you manage your quality around other workflows like amendments, substantial amendments, the managing adverse events or protocol deviations and things like that. We're going to start to see a pretty big sea shift, I would say, in terms of what is normalized for the last 20 years to where we're going to be in the next 6 to 12 months. I'm pretty excited. I think there's going to be some really interesting data which will be read out in terms of how these are being managed. And we'll see it at scale.
So let's say I'm a CRO or a biotech company and I would like to implement AI in my workflows. Name one area that I should think about first and will have the biggest impact, both for CRO and biotech.
Rather than sort of saying CRO and biotech, the way I would think about it is ClinOps operating model. We have customers who manage their clinical operations within their own walls. So they're doing the trial work themselves, or they're outsourcing to a CRO. Either way, I think the distinction to me is who's actually doing this clinical operations work. Generally, the first question I ask is, are you a biotech or a pharma who would normally outsource the work to a CRO? And if that is the case, then the way you interact with our AI teammates changes because we're not doing the work. We're only helpful if somebody is actually using us to do the work. To answer your question from a CRO or a sponsors who are actually managing their own clinical trials, I would say like 4 areas broadly, which I think are quite impactful. Site-related workflows, so site startup, maintenance, closeout. The regulatory management, so TMF, trial master file, end-to-end management, completeness, missing documentation, inspection readiness, things like that. Your essential document lists also fall into that, EDP or green light package management, things like that. Data management and monitoring. And the last one would be finance. Finance is actually a very uniquely interesting problem because there's a lot of nuance and complexity around how different each budget can be at the site level, maybe even a vendor level, at a site, at a country level, things like that. Because of this complexity, frequently forecasting becomes really difficult, both for CROs as well as sponsors, to understand what their outlay is into the next quarter, 2 quarters, and beyond. And that type of dynamism and the collection of information to give you much higher accuracy in terms of forecasting is something which we're seeing right now with our products. So these are the 4 pillars I would say. I think you can pick and choose whatever makes sense the most from an operating clinical operations team. If you're not managing trials yourself, which is a large chunk of the customers out there, especially your customers of Syneos, for example, there what we're seeing is audit. So the trial oversight and how you oversight your vendors changes dramatically because now you're bringing a teammate like ours to come and sit on top of the existing data, existing systems, whether it be your existing EDC or TMF or ECO or any of the other like IWRS and things like that. And what we're doing is a comprehensive real-time audit to say, these are the challenges or these are the findings which we have, or this is where everything's going well. And very quick ROI, you sort of plug and play and you're getting reporting on a regular basis. So those are the 2 broad areas I would say we've seen quick ROI.
Ram, thank you very much for a very insightful discussion in how we can use AI in clinical operations, improve workflows, improve productivity, quality, timelines, and hopefully impact on finances. I'm optimistic that we are not necessarily reducing employees, but actually are augmenting so they can do more and we can grow together. This was a fascinating discussion. Thank you very much for joining me on this podcast for Early Signals.
Thank you, Dr. Harb. It's a pleasure being here.
That's all for today's episode of the Syneos Health podcast, Early Signals. I'm your host, Dr. Wael Harb. If you have other topics you would like to hear on this podcast, please send us a message at podcast@syneoshealth.com. For access to more future-focused, actionable life science insights, please visit the Insights Hub at seniushealth.com.